Welcome to another episode of Parenting Teens Advice Redefined for Today's World, where we dive into real, raw, and honest conversations. We want to raise not kids, we want to raise humans to come out into this world and be successful and confident and authentic. And these are the conversations that do that. Today's conversation is one I think every parent of a teenager needs to hear. I am joined by Dr. Lisa Riegel, who brings together neuroscience, education, and real-life application in a way that makes the teenage years make so much more sense. She holds a PhD in educational policy and leadership from The Ohio State University, has spent over 25 years working alongside schools and organizations to build cultures that support real engagement and lasting change. She's the author of NeuroWell and the creator of the 7C framework, helping parents, educators understand how biology and environment shape learning, emotions, and behavior. What we're talking about is what's actually happening in the teenage brain. If you have ever wondered whether your teen's behavior is willful or wired, this is going to give you some clarity and a whole lot of hope. Today, we're diving into why translating brain science into everyday parenting isn't optional. It's essential. Welcome, Dr. Lisa Riegel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. There's a lot of, I feel like I want to dive into like your story, why you're here, why are you doing all of this? What's the point, Lisa?
Yeah. So my story really starts in my own teenage years into adulthood. And I found that I was in my life for everybody else. I came from a very high achieving family that expected high achievement. And I never really thought about my own pathway to happiness. And so when I went through college, graduated with all the cords and the bells and the whistles, and then I ended up in a job that I really hated. And I was actually selling greasing systems for semis and off-road construction equipment, which, was really well aligned with my English literature degree. So I took it on as a challenge, and by all data points, I was successful. I had, my own house, my own car. I was making more money than my friends, and I was miserable. So when I was 25, I quit everything. I called off a wedding a few weeks before I was supposed to get married. And I said, I am not happy. I'm not living my life for myself. And I threw on a backpack and I walked around Florida for a few weeks, and I just had no structure and just let myself, for the first time in my life, figure it out. And so I think that started my journey, because once I figured it out, I was like, I want to work with kids and I want to teach and I want to help people, become the best versions of themselves. And it set me on a pathway that I've really not ever had the low dip again. I was aligned. And so that really fuels a lot of my passion about helping people find their road to happiness. And that change starts in the brain. And it's really about understanding how our brain is developed and how it's structured, and how we can actually, when we gain that self-awareness, we can gain a lot more self-control, and we can take kind of control of our pathways. And I think a lot of teens today are, I worked at the high school level. I loved working with at-risk kids. And I just think, especially today, we have so many mental health problems and so many contextual factors that are making it really difficult to find happiness. And so that's kind of my mission, is to work with parents and schools and say, we can do this. There's ways that we can help ourselves too, not just our children, but help ourselves become happier.
Love it. It's such a good story. And I didn't know half of that. Wow. That was, so when you were 25, I was 61 when I did all that, but
right. Well, and it's funny too, because I think a lot of people do that. You live for your parents, and the 20s are really difficult because you're kind of an adult, but you're kind of still tethered to that. Yeah. Then a lot of us end up married, and then we start having children. And then your 30s, I always say the 30s are just about wiping noses, wiping butts, wiping surfaces, and you don't have a lot of time for yourself.
Yes.
And then into your 40s, and as your kids start to leave the nest, and a lot of my friends, they get to that point where they're like, now what? Mm-hmm. What have I done? And so I think a lot of people have that kind of midlife crisis, because that's the trajectory of the way we live. And so if we can help kids have that epiphany earlier on, then their pathway's a lot happier.
Cut out the middleman.
Cut out the middleman.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So let's dive into, what do you mean by behavior and engagement and biology? Like what is the whole tie here, first of all?
Sure. So in a nutshell, all of our behavior, social behavior, academic behavior, work behavior, is really the product of the intersection between our biology and our context. So when we understand our biology, specifically how our brain forms perceptions, I know a lot of people know about kind of the limbic brain and the stress brain and all of that. But what I really focus on is, how does our brain form perceptions? Because that's the information that informs whether or not that system is firing. Mm-hmm. And so when we understand that biology, we reframe the problems that we're seeing. And so then we create better solutions. And then the other side of the equation is your context. And at the end of the day, we have a lot of control over our context. Mm. So if we can leverage our understanding of biology and we can manufacture a positive context for ourselves, then we can gain self-awareness, self-regulation skills, and feel a sense of self-control and autonomy.
Oh, so good. So let's dive right into the teens then. I mean, what is happening with and I hear this all the time in the schools from teachers and parents, like, my kid is completely unmotivated, completely disengaged. And I want to refer to many of my episodes, solo episodes, where I have said, it's not that they won't, it's that they can't. And I think this really ties into that philosophy. So what is actually happening when our kids are not motivated, not engaged? Are they just like being teens and they just hate us, or they're bored, or what's actually happening?
Well, I think that it's part of just teenage years are about like thinking your parents are dumb. And, my daughter's 23 now, and it's amazing how much smarter I became all of a sudden. So some of it is just natural. It's always been that way. But when you think about that equation of biology and context, both of those things play into the question you just asked. So first of all, let's talk about context. So our brains, and actually, let me back up. First, let's talk about how our brain forms perceptions and then how our context impacts that.
Yeah.
So our brain is like a giant corporation. And we think of like, it's our brain, but it's actually not. It's like a big company. So just like a company might have a sales team and a data team and a fulfillment center and all of those things, the CEO is ultimately responsible for that. And in our brain, the CEO is the prefrontal cortex. It's where our executive functions live. And this is the part of our brain where our character and our morals and our personality live. And so when you talk about, is this willful or is it not? If we are not controlling the other departments of our brain, then that part of our brain is controlling our CEO. And so what I talk to kids about a lot is that when you understand these sections of the brain, the goal of being happier and healthier and more successful is making your CEO a strong leader in your brain. And so in perceptions, what happens is there's a section of our brain called our thalamus. It's in the limbic system. 80% of the traffic in our brain is below our nose. And so there is a lot of thinking going on. And because what's below our nose is unconscious and doesn't know a story and can't tell time. So the function of that limbic system is about making sensory associations between all the sensory data that's in the environment, what I smell, hear, touch, see, and what my brain associates with my past. So our past is our present. And so when you think of perceptions, what happens is that data manager in our thalamus takes in all the information from our senses. And the first thing it does is says, okay, let me go into my memory bank. And the other thing with memories is we think of memories like a library, like you just go pull the file folder out and read your memory. But that's not actually how it works. Our memories are fragmented and stored in multiple different parts of our brain. And so our amygdala stores sensory associations. And so not stories, can't tell time, doesn't know a story. So it's just sensory associations. This is why, like, if you're going to sell your house, your realtor says, burn a candle that smells like cookies or baked cookies, because most of us have positive associations between that smell and a sense of home. So when I walk into a home I'm considering buying and it smells that way, unconsciously, my body relaxes and feels a sense of love and family and commitment and things. So all of that is happening unconsciously. So that's the first thing it does. It picks up all these sensory associations. And I kind of think of these associations almost like filters. And I always use the analogy of like a spaghetti strainer. So if you have a banana, the banana represents reality. Then we have all these sensory associations that represent a number, a series, millions of different colanders or strainers. If I take the banana and I shove it through a colander, on the other side, it doesn't look like a banana anymore, right? It's still a banana, but it doesn't look the same. So our perceptions are the product of our sensory associations based on what reality is giving to our brain. So those things color the way that we read our reality. So that's kind of the biology of perceptions. But then when you think about kids today, there's a lot of contextual factors that are creating negative filters in their brain. So for example, when I grew up, I watched Little House on the Prairie and Saved by the Bell and Love Boat and things that were about like saying you're sorry when you make a mistake and being a good community member or being a good friend or things like that. In today's media, it's about you and I are going to get together and manipulate that person so we can vote them off the island, right? And so our media is inundated with a message to children that says the world is chaotic and dangerous and people are not there to help you. We grew up through repeated experiences of these associations that we made with a worldview of like people are generally kind, your community's there to help you. It's a difference. So go back to the banana, right? So you see things going on in the world. I'm going to see the things that bring community together. I'm going to see beautiful things that are happening. Kids today are going to see the manipulation. They're going to see the negative things. Then you add on there social media. And we all know social media is a nightmare. But the other thing about social media that we don't think about is that it destroys altruism. Because when I'm online and I have my profile, let's say I change my profile picture to a flag or a cancer ribbon, or, I virtue signal something. I wear, all of a sudden I get 4,000 likes. From a brain perspective, every like is a little hit of dopamine, which makes you feel happy and gives you energy. If you and I are in a real brick and mortar space and you fall down and I help you up and you say thank you, it's one hit. So from a risk reward, it's a bigger risk for me to reach out to a human and to do something to get one hit, which isn't very big, or doing something that really isn't a risk at all to get 4,000 hits. And so social media is creating this kind of risk reward system that's making kids less altruistic in the real spaces because it's too dangerous. They already think people are dangerous. And then why would I stick my neck out for the hope of maybe one hit of dopamine? And then on top of that, we have parenting styles in today's world that are way over parenting. We know where our kids are at every moment. We structure all of their time. And you think about how do you learn how to fail? How do you learn how to make mistakes? If I'm a jerk with my friends when we're playing unstructured in the yard and they leave, then I'm sad. And I think, well, maybe I shouldn't be a jerk next time. But when you're at a organized space and then the parents intervene and say, oh, Cheryl, those were not nice words that you used. You need to say you're sorry. Kids don't learn to resolve their own conflict. They also don't learn how to make fun. They expect external forces to do it for them. And even my kids, they're 20 and 23. And I'm always like, why don't you guys have some friends over or whatever? And they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? And I'm like, I'm not Julie from the Love Boat, right? It's not my job to like organize your day, but they don't know how to do it because they had years and years. And, that's how we learn through repeated experiences. Yeah. And then the one last context I'll speak to is the medical industry. Today's world, when a child feels uncomfortable, they go to the doctor and they say, I feel anxious. And they say, well, you have anxiety. And they put them on meds. Or I'm sad. Oh, you have depression. And they put them on. And I'm not saying that that's not real, that they don't feel that way. But part of our problem is that our body has 4 states of awake. We have a calm state where just everything's calm. Then we have an alert phase. And what they call that is eustress, like EU stress. And it's stress. It's like the kind of stress you have before a tennis match or before a job interview. You kind of get a little bit of stress chemicals in your body. It focuses your mind, and your CEO is right there, ready to go, super sharp. That's good. Kids today, the next phase of awake is alert or alarm. So there's calm, alert, alarm. Alarm is when that limbic part of your brain has hit the panic button and said, oh my gosh, we're in danger. CEO, go out, have a cup of coffee because we need to keep you alive. And so the CEO is not in the house. And kids today jump from calm to alarm. They don't know how to live in alert. And I've had conversations with both of my kids. My daughter's gotten better about it, but my son, like they'll say, well, it makes me nervous to go to a club or go somewhere unfamiliar. And I get anxiety. And I'm like, you get alert. There's a difference between being alert and being anxious. Everyone feels uncomfortable when they walk into a new setting. But what you want to do is train your body to be alert so that your brain is functioning and firing rather than paralyzed, where then now you have an anxiety attack. But when the medical industry continues to just label us and give us a pill for it, it doesn't teach us to control our own brain. And I can't believe how many kids I see that introduce themselves and within 5 minutes, I know all their diagnoses. And so it becomes a filter and an identity piece. So again, that banana, now the banana is going through safe, unpredictable world, mean people. It's going through, I'm always socially anxious and uncomfortable. I don't know how to get myself out of this or deal with conflict, so I'm going to avoid it. And so now all of a sudden, things that should feel like safe environments don't. They feel dangerous. And so the stress ramps up.
Wow. You blew me away. That was a TED Talk. I'm like, oh my God, there's like 80,000 things I want to go down. and it's the way you explain the colander and kids these days and us, real and all the shows. Yep, totally dating myself, but The Love Boat was one of my favorites. And that was really, what an analogy, because, do we ever notice now that a lot of our, and I'm not lumping millennials, I'm just saying as an age group, can be, not always, can be so quick to get so offended.
Yes.
And yet we're like, but I'm not trying to offend you.
Right.
But you just totally put a light on it, because that's where they're coming from. And that's their perception based on their context. As opposed to us, where, I say all the time, people are good. Like, there's a few, but people are good. And when people have conversations, they don't, intentionally set out to offend your identity or your political stance or whatever. But then you have this generation that has gone through this colander. And I understand so much more now, because how many people in my generation say, why are they offended by everything?
Yes.
Jesus, I can't even have a joke. I can't even. And in one sense, I like the offense in the sense that I'm getting called out for things that are not appropriate or not making people feel comfortable and safe in this generation. Great. Call me out. I will correct it. But you get the call outs sometimes where you are intentionally offending somebody.
Right.
And that's not the case. And so this is like, you're just like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, from a biology standpoint, when kids, so there's 2 times in our life that our brain kind of does like a cleaning house, like spring cleaning. And so it happens when puberty starts, and it happens at the end of our, like the beginning of our 20s. So at the beginning and end of puberty. And basically what it does is it says, okay, we've been making all these neural connections, but in order to make an automatic neural connection, you need a lot of repetition, experience, and emotion. So it's laying down. So if you think of your brain like a highway, and you just have a big grassy field, and as you start to have repetitive experiences, then you start to walk across, like if you walk across a field a bunch of times, you kind of end up with a path.
Yeah.
Eventually it's a paved, automatic, well-used ramp, right? Or pathway. what the brain does is it says, hey, we've got a whole lot of like trampled grass that's not going anywhere. So we're going to clean up, and it sloughs off a lot of the noise in the brain to help you focus. What's interesting is that the first period of sloughing off in the brain actually in teenagers loses its ability to read facial expressions. And so we end up with you can't discern between worry or sadness or anger. So unless somebody's straight up crying, they read most facial expressions except like the really cartoonish ones like surprise and happy or whatever. They read it as anger. So when you think about all the conflict that you have with teenagers, one of the things that I tell parents, and they've come back and told me this is the most valuable thing you've ever said, is when you are talking to your child, name your face. I'm not angry, I'm concerned.
Ooh.
And that makes a difference because it takes that thalamus and says, hey, don't you make an association between my face and faces that were angry because I'm not angry.
That's so good.
It
Especially, well, it's funny because, not funny, it's coincidental. I just did a podcast recording yesterday with Katie May, who specializes in self-harming. And it is a matter of being able to name your face when you're addressing serious concerns, because if you don't, I feel like your kid is now saying, oh, this isn't safe to talk about because she's angry, or I'm making her upset. I can't make my mom upset or my dad angry. Right. So by name, like this just ties it right together by naming your face in a really deep, challenging, raw, but honest conversation. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, and she may have talked about this if she talks about self-harm, but when we think about those stages of awake, right? So you're calm, you're alert, you're in alarm. And then the fourth one that I didn't mention is fear. That's when you're chronically in alarm. And now this non-conscious part of your brain has taken over. So when you look at self-harm, it's actually a response to the chemicals that are released. So if you dissociate, so if you're a person who basically freezes when you're in, and so that when you have a stress situation, your brain makes a really quick decision. Can I get out of this, or am I going to take a punch? Right? If you're in a car and you're driving and you get cut off, you get your sympathetic nervous system and you get like super focused and you swerve out of the way because your body is saying in that split moment, we can get out of this danger. If you're sitting at a stoplight and somebody's barreling down, they're going to rear end you, then your brain goes, we need to prepare for the injury. So an opposite effect happens, and like all the blood is centered around your trunk because you can lose a limb, but you need the blood.
Right. You're gripping.
It also sends out, we make our own opioids in our brain, natural opioids and analgesics to numb the pain. And then it slows down time. Like if you've ever fallen and you have like a whole conversation with yourself on the way down. So that's dissociating.
Yes.
When you have a child whose brain continually dissociates because they feel like they can't get out, they're trapped, they don't have control or agency, then what happens is just like a person who drinks too much. Like if somebody never drinks, one glass of wine will get them loopy. Yeah. If you drink all the time, so if your body's in that alarm or fear state in a regular basis, you build a tolerance. And so when kids cut, that pain, that abject pain that they have through the cut, first of all, makes them feel something, because when you're dissociating a lot, you feel kind of numb and sort of floaty. It's kind of like when you're in the zone is a good version of dissociation. Yeah. But then what happens is because you have an acute cut, your brain will spurt out like a little extra. So it's kind of like being at the bar and you've had 3 or 4 beers and then you're like, I'm going to get a shot of Jack because it's like an extra bump. And it's the opposite way if you are a kid who is regularly in alarm, who tends to go more in the fight and flight, because those kids then get a lot of cortisol and then they crave that. So they become adrenaline junkies. So they do risky behaviors because they want that jolt, because because their baseline now is elevated.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it just makes so much sense. So we have our kids now in the mode that they're in, this stress, this disengagement, or the opposite stress, high crisis moment. How how are parents unintentionally increasing this stress, even with the best intentions?
Yeah. So one thing I would say, and I learned this as a parent as well as in the work I do, is so I had a daughter who was very highly anxious. And when she would come to me with a problem or all stressed out, I tried to fix it. So, she's in an elevated state. So at that point, her CEO is at Panera having a cup of coffee, right? So I'm not speaking to her. I'm speaking to the system in her brain that is meant to keep her alive. And I am firing her, we'll try this, we'll do this, we'll do this. That is just elevating the stress level. And so what I like to do with Paige is I will say, when she calls upset about something, I'll say, do you need me to listen or do you need some help figuring this out? And I have been amazed at how many times she says, I just need to vent. And as she's venting, she solves her own problem. So again, going back to that overparenting, she's gaining self-agency that she can do it. She just needs a trusting space to get it out in an appropriate way. And then, once she's calm, sometimes I'll be like, okay, so what's your plan? That's another thing I tell parents, use that phrase. What's your plan? Let your kid work through the problems that they need to address and maybe ask guiding questions. But I think for a long time for me, as my identity as a parent was, I want to fix this for them and that will make me a good parent. And what I realized that wasn't making me a good parent. It was actually making me a bad parent in a lot of ways. And when I backed off that, when I started asking that question, do you need me to listen or do you want me to help you? What I found was that she just needed me to listen, and then I was doing what she needed. So I was actually being a better parent for her.
And man, it feels so much less pressure when we are trying to solve my daughter's 33 now, and I have to remember to say that more. I think I try to do it, but not all the time. And sometimes I'll find myself giving these solutions and then saying, but I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you what to say. I know you got this, but I'm to try backpedal. Right. And she's editing this, so she's going to go, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you do that, it sends a message that we don't believe you can figure it out.
100%. I say that all the time about helicopter parenting or overparenting. It's like, not only are you not allowing them to build their skills to figure it out, but you're unintentionally saying, I have no faith in you.
Right. And the other thing I tell parents is like, teach your kids about their brain. And the way I do it is I say, your brain's like a corporation. So you have your CEO, and then the thalamus is your data manager, and your data, that's the one that goes in and looks for those sensory associations. Name it. I call my guy Harold. And then I have your amygdala is the guy who decides which nervous system to enact and how hard to hit the button, whether the body needs to be in alert or alarm. I call it Bob. So when you have them name it and you have a conversation, that separation takes away the shame of feeling out of control. And so once you have that conversation with your kids, then they may come home and be, all ramped up about something. And you can be like, what is Harold telling you? Or Bob seems super agitated today. Why do you think he's hitting the fire alarm every 5 seconds? And it creates you as an ally versus an adversary. And it removes that shame. And 9 times out of 10, your kid will be like, I don't know. And it'll be like, I know, let's talk about it. And when you do that, then you're teaching them as well, like, what can we say to Bob to tell him this is okay? And so that's one thing I think is really great, because the shame involved of being emotionally out of control just becomes the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I talk a lot about is helping your kid to understand what is it, understand those colanders in their mind. What is it that triggers you to get upset?
Yeah.
And not focused on the what, but the why. So for example, I get anxious if I'm late. I do not like to be late. And I know where that comes from. It's not about time. It's about when I was growing up, my parents were divorced. My dad was always late. So I spent hours sitting on the front stoop waiting for him. My brain associated these negative feelings with lateness. And so it's associated with worth or love or respect or all of those kinds of things. So I am late. My body dysregulates. And I know I'm not waiting for my dad. But again, it doesn't know time and can't tell us. It's just making associations. And so now that I know that, I can make my CEO say, hey, this is not that. Like, you're running late. This is not that. It's fine. So when I start to feel myself being uncomfortable, I still don't like being late. It doesn't ruin my day. It doesn't fluster me like it once did, because I can control that. I can decide and tell Harold, don't associate that colander. It's the wrong one. And so it gives you much more power to control your own mind.
Oh my gosh. So I have 70 different things to ask, but I don't want to miss the 7C framework.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's dive into that. This is your baby, and I want to know what it is and just explain it to the audience. And of course they can get the book, but I want to know the 7s. I'm really interested in this and how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually added an 8th C, and the book that I have is called Aspirations to Operations. And it's really for any leader, anybody who leads anybody. So it can be a parent who leads their family. It can be a business person who leads teams. But essentially the first C is culture. And it's about controlling the context, right? So how do we infuse positivity into the context so that we are reducing the negative associations that our brain has? So in the home, for parents, simple things like at dinner time, when you're eating dinner with your kids, say, what's something really great that happened today? And what you'll find is that they don't have an answer. They'll say, nothing. And you push them and then they go, I don't know, I didn't get in a fight. And you're like, that's not good. The absence of bad, right? And so I started doing this with my kids when they were in elementary school, and we did it every day. Tell me 2 good things that happened today. And it was when you tell your brain, that's your CEO telling your thalamus, you need to pay attention to the stimulus that's good. Yeah. And so that it starts to build that framework. And if you take an example, like you have a set of identical twins, and one twin has a negative confirmation bias in those colanders, the other one's positive. And I might say, hey, how was your day? And the negative twin's going to say, it was horrible. I woke up late. I was running late. I had to speed to get to work. My parking spot was way in the back. I was running in. I spilled my coffee all over myself. I was late to a meeting. It was just a terrible day. The one with the positive confirmation says, well, it started rough because I was late and I had to kind of speed to get here and park far away, but I got my steps in, and then I got in and got clumsy and I dropped my coffee. But this really nice person helped me pick my coffee up and get myself cleaned up. And my friend gave me a sweatshirt, and because I ruined my shirt, my colleagues were super nice about being late. Same event, different experience. And so the more we can build that positive context to create those filters. And then the next C's are sort of the planning C's. And so it's about clarity, coherence, and cadence. So, clarity is, what does the desired state look like? And social scientists who study hope is about agency and pathways. It's goal-directed energy that you believe in yourself. So goal-directed energy and agency plus pathways. And so we have kids who don't know where they want to go in their life. So they don't have that goal-directed energy.
Yeah.
We have a pathway. This was my experience before my quarter life crisis, was I had a pathway and I had agency for a goal that somebody else had defined for me. Crash down. But a lot of kids today, especially you think of like AI and all the uncertainty and then all the negativity that's in the world and global warming and like just all the concerns that they live with, don't have hope. And so getting some clarity around what could a desired state look like? What would, and part of that is teaching you to understand what your body feels like when you're happy. Like, it's amazing to me how many times, like, I'll ask people, what does happy feel like? And they can't answer that. So one of the exercises that I do, and I do it myself and I teach this, is in the morning before you wake up, or if you're not a morning person, do it before you go to sleep. Lay in your bed, take deep breaths, squeeze your muscles, relax, like get your body as comfortable as you can get. And then visualize wherever your happy place is. So for me, it's the beach, like the sound, the smell, the waves, everything. Like I love the beach. So I will visualize the beach, but then what I do is notice my body relaxing. So I notice, and so what I'm doing is deliberately putting sensory associations together. I'm saying, I feel this way when I'm in my happy place. And that mind-body connection can make a big difference in helping to calm down. And so, getting kids to think about, when do you feel happy? And if they don't have a long-term plan clearly in mind, how do you develop, some clear aspects to, maybe your goal is every day I'm going to do something that makes my body feel happy. And that could be it, just to get them started, And then that coherence thing is, when you start to help your child move forward, because I feel like the moment your kid breathes for the first time, your worry meter goes up and it just never goes back down. And so I think a lot of times, we worry so much about our kids' future, but like, I look back to when I was a teenager, I was a mess. I mean, I did the things I wanted to do, but I was dumb and I was naive, and, and all of those little failures that I had were really great. What I shouldn't do and what I should do. And a lot of things we do are about learning what we don't want versus learning what we do. And so helping them to, kind of frame that out a little bit and make it more coherent for them, where it's not like, okay, you're telling me to be happy, but then you're telling me there's this pathway that I hate that I have to. So, and then some of it's cadence, they're teenagers and they're supposed to make mistakes. And if they come home with a B, nobody when they're 30 years old is going to be like, you got a B on that science test and you're a loser and I don't want you to work for me. So we blow this stuff out of proportion and we feed the anxiety. And then we also feed a self-talk that becomes a colander of, I have to be perfect, or I'm a failure, or I'm a disappointment, or I'm a circus seal. If I don't perform, I'm not loved. Right. So you end up thinking. So I think as a parent, thinking about the planning seeds of how you help your child plan for happiness is really around planning for, how do I address the biology? How do I create a context that is reasonable, that gives them happiness and a pathway to get there and is cohesive and consistent? And in business, for like educational leaders, it's really about thinking, even in the classroom, like, what do you want me to do? Like I go into schools and they'll say, oh, we want to do more student-centered learning. And then I'll say, well, what do you see? What do you hear if that's happening? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, if you don't know what you're looking for, then you're never going to get there. Right. And then thinking about, where is your staff now versus where they want to be, and doing that kind of incremental change. So the model kind of works at the individual level or the business level. The middle C's are about engagement. So how do we engage them? And that's through collaboration and coaching. How do we coach? And the coaching piece is huge, because if we understand, like I see a lot of times leaders that will have two employees that are having a conflict, and they address is what happened. And again, it's not about what happened. It's about, why did that upset you? So say that you and I are colleagues and I'm somebody who openly gives feedback. I love feedback. I'm not threatened by it, but you're a person who your brain associates feedback with failure. And so your stress system elevates with that. And so when I start to give you feedback, you're like, go to the boss and you say, she's always nitpicking me. She's always blah, 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 right? Now, all of a sudden, the manager comes in and says, well, you shouldn't have said that here. You should. The reality is your teammate doesn't respond to feedback the way you do. So how can we provide support and be helpful in a different way? Because a lot of times it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
And then the sustainability C's are really, they're around celebration and around communication. And so we forget to celebrate. The world is very much about go, go, go.
Oh my God.
We need to celebrate every little step. And I always use the example. So there's 7 conditions that need to happen to make a habit. And so if you think about like New Year's resolutions, like 90% of the people on this planet have already chucked those, even though we're not even 2 months in. Yeah. So why do we fail? So say you and I say, okay, we want to lose weight this year. Okay, we're going to stop going to the Mexican restaurant, drinking margaritas and sticking our face in a bag of chips. We're going to go to Golden Corral. That's not the appropriate behavior, right? We make assumptions that kids know how to make a better choice. They're just choosing not to. Goes back. So the first thing is they have to have a knowledge of where to go instead.
Yeah.
Then they have to have the self-awareness to drive past, in that highway in your brain, to drive past the comfortable exit. And, so I'm going to be driving toward that Mexican restaurant because it's a habit. I have to be able to have the self-awareness to say, no, wait a minute. I said I didn't want to do this anymore. I want to go to the vegetable restaurant. We also have to have the will to be uncomfortable. You and I are going to have to put stuff in our mouth that we have never eaten before, and it's comfortable, right? And so as we change behaviors with our kids, they're going to be uncomfortable. We also have to have energy. So when you think of that analogy of a highway in your brain, the highway in your brain is a big grassy field. The only way we build automaticity is through repetition, and it takes energy, just like it takes gasoline to pave a road. Yeah. So we have to have that energy. And then we also have to have that support, because it goes back to the dopamine. If I'm getting regularly celebrated as I do these little incremental things, then there's a better chance that I'm going to get those little dopamine hits, and I'm going to maintain the energy needed to pave that pathway. Yeah. But the really big one is we need tenacity to forgive ourselves. You and I will end up at the Mexican restaurant. We will. We'll fall off
on the way, but anyway, yeah.
Right. But when we get there, here's the big choice that happens a lot of times is that we either say, Cheryl, that was fun. Next week, we got to go back to that vegetable restaurant. We're doing so well. Mm-hmm. Or we can say, girl, we were never meant to be healthy. I'll see you next week. And that's what most people do.
Yes.
And so when people fall, and I see this in schools a lot, like even in behavior plans, we count how many times they fall off the wagon rather than counting how many times they paved the new exit.
Yes.
So we use negativity as a reinforcement, and that doesn't work for the human brain. Mm-hmm. And then, we need that support. I'll do it with you. Let me help you. We need that constant celebration. And, if you and I do lose 10 pounds and nobody says, hey, you look nice, then it depletes our energy to continue down that path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Okay, and I'm just going to point out what really struck me in there, besides everything, but the culture and context, I'm thinking the reticular activating system right there. And I've said, I think in a lot of my solo podcasts is, you go to bed as a parent and you've had the day from hell. There is no worse day. And you have the opportunity now to choose again. Mm-hmm. And so when you wake up, can you say, what good is going to come out of today? What good breakfast, what good lunch, what good is going to come out of today, so that your brain, as you just said, triggers looking for the good stuff, as opposed to, oh, here we go again.
Yeah. Well, and here's two things to try. One is, as a parent, to train yourself to think, how am I communicating to my child? And so put 10 rubber bands on your left wrist. And every time you frame a command or a negative, why didn't you do that? Or you never do that, right? Take a rubber band and put it on your right. And then see how fast you're going left to right, because you're sending boom, 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 negative. And so the kid is associating you asking something with negative, and then it's creating those colanders of so that's one thing. The other thing is, I read an article, this was many years ago, and I loved it. It was called Why Shamu Saved My Marriage. And they were talking about animal trainers. So when you're training an animal, so in this case, Shamu, you don't tell Shamu to jump out of the water, and when he doesn't, kick him in the teeth. You wait for him to jump, and then you give him a fish, and you associate jump with fish, just like a puppy, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually, because that's a good reward, then it starts to recognize that that's what I want to do. Same thing with a baby. Babies inadvertently start to learn to pull their lips away from their gums. And when they do it, we all go crazy and coo on them and talk about them. They start to learn the power of a smile and the positivity. So in this article, what she said that it was driving her crazy because her husband's he never closed the cabinets or drawers in the kitchen. So she'd come out and everything's hanging open. It would drive her nuts. So what she did, she would close them. And she said she had tried everything. She had tried appealing to his sense of, this makes me upset. Can't you just do this for me? And, and yelling at him and all these things. So what she finally decided was she would shut the door. And when he would come down, she would say, thank you so much for shutting that cabinet. I really appreciate it because it matters to me. And he hadn't done it, and so then he looked at it and he was like, that makes her feel good. And I'm getting a positive. And so she's like, after she did that a couple times, all of a sudden, problem gone. So you think of the things that parents are haranguing their kids to do, like clean your room or shower or, clean up your dishes or things like that. Do it for them. Thank them for doing it. Do it a couple times. And start to be like, oh, if I do this, it feels good. And because again, their pathway in their brain is mom just nags me. And so if you start to build, mom actually appreciates me, they want more of that.
I love that. And my last question was, okay, if there's one thing, you just answered it. You said, like, you just blew me away with that. It was awesome. I really want to, I know you are an expert in the schools, and I really want to say, if you're open to a sequel for educators.
Yeah.
Because I think our high school teachers and administrators need to hear this stuff as well, for sure. This has been unbelievable. My mind is blown. I knew it would be after we had our first conversation, but that just I'm blown away. Everything makes so much sense. Lisa, tell us how to find you and how to work with you and all the good things and your books, all of it. And we're going to put it all in the show notes, but I want to hear you say it.
Yeah. So I have 3 books. One is called Stop Doing What Doesn't Work. And it's really for schools to organize parent engagement, because we don't really partner with parents. We say we do, but we're not really partnering. So it gives them all kinds of examples of how we can build stronger bonds with parents. Because again, that context is really important. If we can share positivity across different contexts, we can shape those brains. So that's the Stop Doing What Doesn't Work. The next one is NeuroWell. And parents or schools would find NeuroWell useful. It goes through why are kids struggling, so some of the social media, and it goes through a deep dive into that. It goes through the brain science in a lot more detail than what I did here. And then there's a section on how to build a NeuroWell culture. And it has a lot of examples from education, but a lot of the examples are things you can do in your home. There's lots of different, like the tell me 2 good things. That can be a routine in a classroom. It can be a routine at dinner. And then the 4th section of the book is how to build a curriculum in the home for positivity. So that's kind of the parent side of it. And then the recent book that just came out is Aspirations to Operations, and it's how to make transformative change stick. So it's really a leadership book, kind of about how do we shift organizations to build a NeuroWell culture, to build more productivity, engagement, fulfillment for everybody in the organization. And so people can get a hold of me through LinkedIn. The books are available on Amazon. And I love to, if a group of people comes together and says, hey, we'll all pitch in and we want to do a book study. I do that, like virtual book studies with parents and, meet once a month or whatever. And I do that with educators or with leaders. I'll come in and do keynote addresses at conferences, or I can do workshops. And then I usually take about 5 or 6 schools a year that really want to make transformative change. And we'll go deep with them and walk them through the whole process, the whole way.
So good. So much value. I totally appreciate. I'm so glad we connected. I know I'm quite sure listeners are going, okay, give me more, tell me more. So honestly, I would love to do another one for educators, because I really think to build their capacity, they need this information. And it makes so much sense. Like everything, it's not just buzzwords and we're just going to, whatever. And then next week, it's going to be a different buzzword. No, this is like viable, important information. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I want to thank you for listening to Parenting Teens Advice Redefined. Listen, I know I say this on every episode, but you got to share this stuff, because you have no idea who's sitting at home thinking, I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what to do with my kid. And here you go. All the answers in the last 52 minutes. So share, download, subscribe. You know a teen, you love a teen, you maybe live next door to a teen, doesn't matter, you got this. If you are listening to these podcasts and reading the books and parenting is hard, you're not failing because you're still trying. So thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to another episode. I just wanted to share something with you because, parenting teens is not just about managing these challenges that we talk about on all the episodes. It's also about evolving alongside them. And I'm Cheryl, and not only the host of this podcast, but I'm also the creator of Insight to Impact Coaching and Consulting. And I help you, moms of teens, reconnect with your true selves so you can lead with purpose. You can parent with clarity. You can create stronger, more meaningful relationships with your kids. Because here's the truth. The transformation starts with you. Together, we will break free from the stress and overwhelm. We will rediscover your power. We will create the life and the family dynamic you always dreamed of. If you're ready to start this journey, let's do it. You might just not recognize your life in the next 90 days. It all starts with a call. There's no pitch. There's no pressure. Just a call to see if I can help. We'll talk about your goals. We'll talk about what's making you feel stuck and what might be getting in your way. And everything you need to connect with me is in the show notes. Again, I'm Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me here on Parenting Teens, Advice Redefined for Today's Complex World, and the creator of Insight to Impact Coaching and Consulting. Have a great day.